Today's secret ingredient was graciously provided by Distant Memory of a Forlorn Star brand farms and their associates. The good folks at Distant Memory of a Forlorn Star toil every day, screaming on the underside of existence, so you can enjoy the freshest inquisitorial corpses and memorabilia without any of the anachronistic risks or the constant threats of patricide. Feeling a little heretical? Nibble on an Inquisitor. We are smack in the middle of CollabCon, but we are wrapped up with Week 26. And that's what we're talking about today. This is the Week 26 recap show on SCP Cafe. I'm your host, Blue Soul, SCP Wiki moderator, chat operator, subreddit moderator, author, loving husband, dog petter, Cologne aficionado, Tottenham Hotspur supporter, and new author. I've got a new post today. This is my first post since Series 2, my first mainless SCP. Now, I had said I was going to do that for Making a Monster, and I honestly feel kind of bad that I didn't get that work completed and kind of follow through on having that be my first since Series 2, but it is what it is. CollabCon came up, the opportunity presented itself, and I don't, I'm happy I did it. I'm sorry that I didn't get the one that we were starting to discuss out ahead of this one, but it is what it is. So there's a lot of new stuff coming out, really coming out heavy now with CollabCon. I think over the next couple of days, you're going to see some of the really heavy hitters get their stuff in just before the deadline, because what I've noticed is the last 2 days, we've seen a lot more really technically advanced stuff come out. There's been a couple of entries, and you know what I'm going to do, actually, we're going to be talking about pretty much every entry that survives on a special CollabCon recap. I didn't attempt to do a full JamCon recap because there were over 100 pieces, and that's insane, but I don't think there's going to be quite so many for this CollabCon. The whole get 2 pieces together in a week was fairly difficult, and I think we're not going to see so terribly many that I can't talk at least a little bit about each one of them and their accompanying pieces. Some of them, a couple of these didn't bother doing an SCP at all. They did like a tale in a GOI format, which is interesting. It's probably not going to win a ton of contests because you, in foregoing the SCP entry, you lose a lot of potential eyes, because a lot of people will, for better or worse, only really look at the skips on the site and leave all of the other stuff out. So, it's one of those that if that was what you were really feeling, if you really wanted the 2 GOIs to interact in a certain way and it made sense to present it in those 2 ways, then, absolutely. If it doesn't make any sense to involve the Foundation, then, who am I to judge? It's unfortunately just what I've seen historically is that you don't really win contests with tales almost ever. So, I have 2 pieces up, along with AIS Mallard as the co-author, and they are SCP-4406 and UIU File 2017-102. There's going to be sort of a post-mortem. I'm going to really deconstruct both works on another special episode. This will go up 1 week early for patrons, and will be available on all usual channels a week later. So I'm going to be quite busy over the next 8 days or so. I'm going to be recording 4 shows in total. So a lot of new content on the way as summer rolls on. Speaking of summer, on the SCP Cafe store, might be a nice time. Get some nice t-shirts. These shirts are super light. They're super comfortable in the summer. This is actually what I'm wearing almost exclusively on the weekends. They're these nice polycotton blends. They're light. They're super comfy to wear. And I am offering 20% off all items in the store with the coupon code SUMMER, SUMMER. If you're a patron, your existing Patreon discount will stack. Use the coupon code you received in your Patreon inbox, and yeah, you could be getting theoretically like 55% off your purchase all in. So yeah, it's been a slow couple of weeks on the store side. Everything, everything's there. I've got stuff in stock. Got restocked on my on the blue Secure Contain Protect shirts. Got plenty of badges. Got plenty of pins, and got an order of shipping materials in to get stuff out a little safer. So yeah, 20% off with the coupon code SUMMER. If you are a patron, your existing coupon code will stack with that. So that's anywhere from 30 to 55% off all items in the store. The Patreon side has been a little flat this month. There's only been the one new patron this month. If you've been enjoying the show, if you've been listening for a while, your patronage is certainly appreciated. And on patreon.com/SCP Cafe, you can see the breakdown of all the different stuff you can get with your patronage. Next tier up on kind of my goals for the Patreon is to be able to live stream the recording of the show. I think it'd be a really cool thing to do. We tried it for a few weeks, and my current internet is simply not capable of it. So that's kind of the goal with the next tier up, is a little bit faster internet connection to make the live streaming more doable. Now, at the end of the Week 25 show, I had indicated I wasn't really sure how Week 26 was going to look with CollabCon coming up. I wasn't really sure how busy the wiki would be outside of the contest. That's always the risk that we have when we do these contests, is that people don't post non-contest works during that time. That wasn't the case in Week 26. There were 15 skips in scope, with 13 of them at or above +1 at the time of selection, and these were all skips that were not CollabCon entries. So I've got 5 to talk about, and with nothing else, we're going to get into it. SCP-4251, Natural Selection by Inkmouth. This work does have an image. It is looks to be some grass or some low-lying stuff viewed from above, and the caption reads, dense ground foliage within SCP-4251. So it has an object class of safe and fairly short procedures. We have a stationary task force that is to keep people away from the perimeter. Anyone approaching is to be told it's closed off for conservation efforts, and gravitational readings within the area are to be monitored regularly via a gravimeter placed at its epicenter, and any fluctuations, any uncharacteristic fluctuations, are to be investigated immediately. So something with abnormal fluctuations in gravity. It's interesting. So the skip is described as an area of land about 35 kilometers square, located within the Northern Forest Complex in northern Myanmar. The area has gravitational pull that alternates between significantly lower and higher than the average gravity on the rest of Earth. The fluctuations occur abruptly between every 230 and 247 days. So what is that, about 8 months? We have randomly fluctuates, and it fluctuates between the low gravity state is about 0.1 G. The high gravity state is about 7 G. So that's quite a huge fluctuation. That's a bit less than the gravity on the moon, which is about 166, about 16% of the Earth's gravity. So it, interestingly, also contains a self-sustaining ecosystem of both plant and animal life. So we have apparently a document 4251-EXT, which is a list of descriptions of the plant and animal life. The organisms found within the skip are not classed as anomalous instances, and it says see addenda. So we have some explanation as to why these organisms in very strange gravitational situations are somehow not anomalous. So we have some logs here that make up the first addendum, video exploration logs. This first exploration happens during a period of low gravity we send a drone in that has it's equipped with serrated rotary blades for cutting foliage. Apparently, we know that it's fairly thick, and we've set up a drone to have some accommodations for that and to be able to still do its job and explore the area. So we're in a temperate rainforest. As we get closer to the epicenter, the flora in the area has changed significantly. There are very few trees. There are leafy ground plants that are much taller. Insects look normal. See some big birds, and the drone has to reduce its forward propulsion to compensate for the lack of gravity and resistance. So as we get another kilometer closer, we're 2 kilometers or so from the epicenter, we have no trees at all. The remaining foliage is broadleaf evergreens and ferns. This foliage is about 6 meters tall in thin strands. It looks kind of like high grass. These leaves are also larger than the comparative plant life in normal circumstances. 1.3 kilometers out, our capture notes an insect approximately 3/4 of a meter in diameter on a web. It's dark brown with gray markings on its carapace that forms diamonds. And though it resembles a spider but has 12 limbs, there's a jointed filament extending from the back of it that looks like a tail, and this filament splits into multiple points at the end, and that filament moves from side to side. We are getting closer. The drone enters a clearing in the foliage at about 0.4 kilometers, and the camera is angled, and we note the drone is directly above a body of water. The gravitational effects have stabilized at its current state of very low gravity. The drone hovers over the water. It gets lowered down a little bit, and the camera pans and reveals 2 mammalian creatures at the edge of the water. And there's a note here that says each is approximately the size of a wolf. That is fairly vague. There are a number of different wolf subspecies. They have a fair amount of diversity in size. So I think rather than making this direct analogy, especially since it starts deviating from being wolf-like very quickly, we should go with something a little more conventional as far as size, because we have that it's the size of the wolf and is close to the ground. It has 4 short, thick legs ending in hooves. They're covered in brown fur with a head similar to that of an antelope. They have short, forward-facing horns, and between the 2 limbs is a fold of membranous tissue, and we startle them on accident, and they use this membrane to glide, much like flying lizards or a few other creatures that have sort of evolved that little evolutionary bonus of being able to glide short distances. Now, we go from that description to, at the epicenter, it says that plant matter has begun to accumulate on the rotary blades. And we don't really explain the mechanism by which it is accumulating. So it leaves, I think, a little too much to the imagination. We have to sort of speculate on what is going on. Are there, like, vines reaching out and grabbing it? Is it just getting too weighed down with having mowed a bunch of stuff over to make it as far as it has? Because in the previous entry, we had it, over a body of water of some sort. There shouldn't be any accumulation on the blades, anything more so at this point. So it's an interesting, little bit confusing description here. So given the risk of entanglement, the forward propulsion's increased and the drone's piloted upwards. We find more insects extending into the upper portions of the foliage, which are now 7 meters above ground level. So fairly tall grass, about 23, 24 feet tall. The drone is returned to the research camp, gets out without any incident. So, and that's an interesting change of pace too. I'm so used to the first log with a drone being something that ends badly for the drone, so we have to send people in. In this case, the drone makes it back fine, and we send people in anyway to further understand the area. And we have a Dr. Duchesne and a researcher Barral that go in to collect samples and to deliver a gravimeter and to describe the anomalous life found within this area. So there's not a ton in this second log to really advance much, but there are some interesting conventions used here that I want to talk about. We have a point here where Barral asks Duchesne, "Did you ever get into gun shooting or anything?" Which is not terribly related to the previous line. And Duchesne says, "Let's not try to talk about irrelevant stuff. We're just making more work for the transcriber." And a little bit further, we find the same 12-legged insect that we saw earlier with the drone, and Barral describes it as something that looks like out of their field guide from spiders of the area, and says it looks the most like a Psecerus. I don't know. I'm not a bug guy. But there's a line here that says, "For the transcriber, that's Psechrus." So we're doing these little things to make it clear that how the transcribing has to work. And I really dig that. I actually almost never see this sort of thing done in a work where we acknowledge the transcriber in the piece. Does it do a lot? No, but it's nice flavor, and it's a little nod to something that we don't normally pay a ton of attention to. So I actually really like that little addition to the piece. Duchesne does note at the end of this that the plants are very soft. They're not rigid at all because they wouldn't need it to stay upright under the low gravity. And they grab some samples of life, place the gravimeter, and get out of Dodge. So after that, we send in an MTF. It's very interesting. We have this natural escalation that we're used to seeing from a drone to a ground team to an MTF, but there's been no actual danger here, but we're doing it anyway. We send in Zeta 9 mole rats, who are quite experienced in gravitational anomalies, and they're outfitted with high-pressure environment suits to go in under the high gravity conditions that now exist in the area. Again, we have a little new convention here, something I don't see very often. Duchesne is sort of patched in via the audio, and he says, "I can hear you. Whose body cam am I looking through?" And command replies, "The team leaders." So that is another little nod to what's going on behind the scenes, that there's a body cam on, Zeta 9 leader, and that is how the researcher is getting their information. It's great flavor. It sets up why, they're not there. They don't really need to be, and it wouldn't be safe for them under these high gravity situations anyway. So Zeta 9, as they get further into this area, notes some of the changes to the flora. The plants feel like a really dense root system. There's little leafy vines, a ground plant that resembles a fern, and is trying to pull on the vines, pushing at the dirt. There's no real give to anything, and it acknowledges how dense it is, and wonders if this is the same plant they were looking at earlier, if they died off, or if this is something new. And then Zeta 9-4 notes some eggs beneath the foliage. They're spider eggs, and they're really, really hard. So 3 separates one of the eggs from the others. They're bonded together with a really thick, viscous substance that they describe as being like rubber cement. They then note 3 animals resembling large scaled rodents, which is an interesting mental picture, about 2 meters long by 1.5 meters wide, so pretty damn big rodents too. They move at a very slow crawl. They move the limbs on the left and then on the right in a sort of a horizontal climbing motion, which, doing what they can under the high gravity situation. And each limb ends in a paw with long curved talons, probably to better dig into the dirt to get traction to every little advantage they can. And Zeta 9 asks, what do we do? Do we engage them? Do we get closer? And Command tells them no. Hold your position, and they do. For 16 minutes, the creatures approach them, and then move to avoid the team and pass by them without any further acknowledgement. We then note one of the mammalians that the drone identified, snuffling along the ground, looking for food. It's quite a bit leaner than those that were seen previously. They make it all the way to the lake, and they note under the water there are birds swimming in the water. And this would sort of make sense with the gravity being what it is, that the water would be a sort of a safer area for them. So Zeta 9 gets extracted. They push through the other side, go out the other way, and Zeta 9-1 captures a still shot of two furred mammals lying down side by side with one nuzzling the other's neck. And that's the end of the log. So we've basically subverted everything that we expect out of an MTF log. There is no action in this piece. We have Addendum 2, final observations from Dr. Duchesne, and it's basically an explanation of what we've found so far. These creatures, despite being strange to look at, are not in possession of any characteristics that couldn't arise naturally in an ecosystem. They're mostly genetic descendants of species that we thought were long extinct. The arachnids closely resemble a particular species believed to have existed 100 million years ago, and the fossilized remains of which have been found in the area. Our doctor believed initially that these organisms were in themselves anomalous, but has decided that no, they're not. So he's recommending these organisms no longer be classified as SCP instances due to their lack of anomalous properties. There were some who would argue that their inclusion within an SCP is sufficient to justify this classification, but if that is the case, where do we draw the line? At what point are the ferns merely ferns, and at what point are they anomalies? At the border of the anomalous region, or only those found within the central biome? So a little bit of meta-commentary here, and this piece ends with, from what we can observe, the organisms have in no way contributed to the existence of the anomaly. Their presence within it speaks only to the adaptability of life on Earth, and perhaps the ubiquity of life itself. I hope you will take these considerations into account. End article. So I really thought this piece was interesting for all of the things that it doesn't do. We go into these logs with a set of expectations of, an encounter and engagement with these animals. I would almost like to see them punched up as more, have the mammals be, more threatening looking, like just really hammer away on the reader's expectations, and then we don't do it. They don't engage. They just move on under the conditions. So this was a really cool piece for being just a mass subversion of how things normally go. And what the other interesting thing in it is, we make no attempt at any point to explain the anomaly. We set up the anomaly as a way to look at these creatures, the flora and fauna within it. And that's where we spend the whole article. We don't know why this area is anomalous. We don't always get to know. And I really like that about it as well. This was a really easy +1 for me for being very, very innovative and very interesting. Moving on, SCP-4846. This is titled Friendly Fossils, and it is a co-write between Multiverse and Zin. This is one of the things where, as much stuff as Zin does do for the wiki, I do like that they do get to sort of pick and choose if they want to do a co-write on something, and this was a really fun little piece. We have an object class of Euclid, no images at the top, and about 3 paragraphs worth of procedures. Individual 4846 instances are stored in climate-controlled containers and collectively stored in a standard hermetic vault, with each instance being professionally maintained by a researcher with field experience in archaeology. Access permissions for instances may be waived by personnel with at least level 2 security clearance, and recurrent access may be granted should the instances respond well to designated personnel. So we have a title of Friendly Fossils. We have individual instances potentially responding well to researchers that are archaeologists. So, things are off to an interesting start. Additionally, a designated fund is to be maintained by the research team overseeing the acquisition of new instances. It's to be budgeted in accordance with fiscal policy to fulfill any 4846 related restoration projects. And when seeking and establishing caretakers or proprietors for locations pertaining to 4846 manifestations, the research team is to maintain a list of retired personnel who are amenable to settling in remote areas and communicate with them as necessary. That's a very interesting paragraph, and it's something that sets up quite a bit to explain later. Additionally, donations to high-profile charities involving wildlife preservation are to be closely monitored, and possible owners of uncontained instances of 4846 are to be identified and, if prudent, investigated. So we're not clear yet on what exactly 4846 is. We can make some assumptions, but there's a lot of things here involving fundraising and charities, and how they directly connect to the skip itself is not immediately clear. So the description indicates that 4846 is sort of a collective designation for a group of anomalous fossils, and we have a log excerpt below, and each instance possesses unique autonomous movement and interactive capabilities. Within the presence of unfamiliar individuals, they typically remain stationary and appear non-anomalous. Instances that are accompanied by stone bases are capable of removing themselves from said stone and will return to the bases when verbally prompted. So we leave a little bit to the imagination here. They're capable of locomotion in some way. Does it matter how? Probably not. The individual instances are typically discovered at or near archaeological or historically significant landmarks after an act of charity is performed to the benefit of the location or individuals who staff it. So, interestingly, most Foundation witnessed manifestations have occurred in national parks. Upon manifestation, instances of 4846 are accompanied by a messily scrawled, handwritten note. Said notes consistently follow an internalized format as seen below, and we have a pull quote here. It says, "You found fossil friend number 4. Jim here loves to hang out with friends. He also loves black box, and then a apostrophe and a black box, which is presumably an S, which is a great place to have a drink and just kick back with your best buds. I would know. I made it a weekly tradition back in my crazier years. Good luck on your quest to explore the past. Your next friend can be found at," and we have coordinates provided. Interesting. So we have a benefactor of some sort, or some person that is responsible for providing these fossil friends. We then have a bit of an origin story, how we first found out about this. There was a reported disappearance of a large cache of fossils from Black Box Museum. Field agents were dispatched to investigate the apparent theft. I'm not immediately clear why the Foundation is immediately looking into this. Perhaps we're just looking into everything because it's what we do. We were informed that the purchase had been arranged with a Mr. Elijah Blackbox, tentatively designated POI 4846. They offered their personal collection to the museum for an unusually low price. The theft was stated to have occurred when the same man had a disagreement with the curators involving placement of the fossils, and interestingly, the missing fossils appeared to have been broken out from the inside of the glass display cases they were stored in. So I think we can probably presume that the fossils, left. And perhaps they Mr. Blackbox here knew they were going to leave. It was an unusually low price because he knew he was going to get them back. It's as good a theory as any. The personnel from the Foundation were sent to examine the museum, discovered a trail of debris that led to a nearby archaeological dig site that was currently in the process of being demolished. About 24 hours after the Foundation secured the location for further investigation, thereby halting the demolition, we got our first recorded instance of SCP-4846. And in the following years, many additional instances were discovered by Foundation personnel in various locations believed to hold personal significance to the POI. A partial excerpt of the recorded instances follow and we start with the instance for Jim, which looks to be a miniature, a little reptile with a very long neck, and it apparently can perform simple party tricks. It can balance drinkware on its back, make small towers of miscellaneous items, and even perform a rudimentary tap dance if placed on a tabletop, so long as at least 3 well-acquainted individuals are seated within close proximity of it. So we have a note here that says, instance emerged from wall and approached Foundation agents during an after-hours discussion between said agents and the proprietor of the establishment, who'd previously expressed concern regarding the longevity of the bar. Foundation personnel provided the owner with a substantial anonymous donation towards keeping the bar running, as well as a list of contacts for live entertainment artists interested in performing at the location. So the Foundation goes to this bar, does a good deed to keep the bar running, and this fossil friend appears, and it gives us coordinates to another one. And that is basically the format that the other 4 entries in here go with. There's an ichthyosaur that is capable of altering its size up to 4 meters long, or shrinking small enough to fit in a pocket. It can function as a self-propelling raft and can carry up to 2 adult humans across shallow waters, moving at a slow pace. There's a microraptor that will open its mouth and emit a soft golden light, as well as an increase in temperature to provide a pleasant and cozy warmth. There is another fossil here, and there are little images next to each of these, which are presumably, public domain fossils available to the public. This 4th one, we have, and we have names. We have Jim, Shelly, Ray, Alex, and Buddy. Those are our 5 fossil friends that are logged in the piece. There are, our 4th one is a reptile that the large back structures on it will vibrate to produce melodic whistling sounds. The behavior is only observed when 2 people who are at least on friendly terms sing together. It will provide a counterpoint. And then Buddy, which is an herbivorous dinosaur, it exhibits behaviors that are related to survival assistance. It can forage for edible plants. It will direct attention to signs of nearby aggressive wildlife. It will serve as a guide if directions are needed to clean water, human outposts, or areas to set up camp. So, a very useful little guy. Found in Congaree National Park, South Carolina, stated to be where it all begun. So, in this last one, the note didn't have coordinates. It merely read, "That's all for now." So, the format these all follow is they're places that were near and dear to this POI's, near and dear to their heart. So we go from this little log to there's only a little bit left in the work. We basically wanted to create a long-term program involving Foundation retirees and these 4846 instances. Finding people that were retiring and give them one of these instances and set them up in their corresponding location to observe and maintain the containment of them. This proposal was approved. Researcher McNamara was assigned as a preliminary trial subject to be the first designated caretaker of an instance. Shortly after, Buddy, the herbivorous dinosaur, was reported to have carried to him a scrap of paper. This was apparently our POI's last will and testament, or a fragment of it anyway, which named McNamara as the recipient of a sizable collection of foreign currency that was amassed during the POI's travels and was kept in a safety deposit box in a nearby bank. The collection was claimed without incident. The currency was verified to be non-anomalous. It's currently housed with the 4846 instances awaiting caretaker assignment. It's noted the 4846 instance in McNamara's care had indicated interest in the inherited coin collection, often picking up individual coins and placing them into organized piles as if mimicking behavior it may have observed previously. So I think the inference here is that Buddy, all of these little fossil friends hung around with our POI and watched him do things, and the portion of the will was found to be non-anomalous. There were no unusual features, save for a small winking smiley face drawn in ballpoint pen on the back of the paper. End article. So when I was reading this, I kept waiting to get slapped across the face with something bad, something scary, something, to take away from, how nice all of this is. And it doesn't come. This is just a nice, a nice pleasant thing that, potentially is a little bit sad, but also, a very sweet little piece. It is the interesting thing to me is that it doesn't try to do some of the things you expect it to do. Kind of like the last piece, that there are certain expectations on, we're setting up, this is really nice, it's nice, it's nice. And you keep imagining, like, as you accrue more and more niceness, there's going to be a really brutal turn or twist of fate to counteract that. And that doesn't show up. It just stays that way. And it's like, oh, well, that was really sweet. I actually really like that. And that was more or less my thoughts with it. I enjoyed the piece. I thought it was a solid co-write. This was an easy +1 from me. Moving on, SCP-4851. This is titled Artificial Selection. This is the strangest goddamn thing. Okay, so 4251 was the first one we talked about this week. That's natural selection. 4851 is artificial selection. They actually have some overlapping points of discussion, and as far as I can tell, there was no intent for these two to be related, not directly. So neither author mentions the other in the work or the comments. Just a really bizarre set of things going on, because these were only a couple days apart too. Natural selection, artificial selection, both covered on SCP Cafe, both with at least broadly similar subject matter, and done totally independently of each other. Weird sort of thing. This was by Tupac Official, and I believe that's their third appearance on Cafe. They had back-to-back weeks, 3614 and 3816. Their first two pieces got covered back in week 8 and week 9. This one has an object class of Keter and an image. It's a goose, or I'm told it's a swan. I believe them. I can't tell the difference. But it is it's a bird. It looks goosey. Apparently it's swanish. Sitting on a nest that looks to be maybe on a pile of trash. And we have a caption that says SCP-4851 instance nesting of the Cygnus olor mute swan species. So we have short procedures, only a few sentences, but they are quite significant. SCP-4851 instances are to be terminated on site. There's something you don't see every day. Due to their differing anomalous properties, personnel should consult each instance's sub-object documentation before engaging. Culling of 4851 populations is to be done with an emphasis on containment. No efforts to encroach upon territory held by 4851 instances shall be made. Protection of existing civilian populations is top priority. So the stakes are high right off the bat in this work, and I like that. It's an interesting dichotomy of setting these very high stakes that are to be terminated on site. They have held territory that we're not trying to take back. We're just trying to protect existing civilian populations. And then immediately to the right of this is a picture of a fucking swan. It's this it's really bizarre, and I like that. It really makes you wonder what's coming. We have a description that 4851 designates members of an ecological community residing in about a 0.6 kilometer square area of Alaska as of 2050 831. So this is set in the far future. Far, I guess far is relative, but it's 31 years from now. So 4851 instances have been recorded to be members of 108 different subspecies of common flora and fauna found in the area. It's noteworthy that several of these species are invasive to the area. They demonstrate a wide range of behavioral, anatomical, and biological anomalies, but the following shared traits exist, and we have some bullet points here. They are resistant to substances that would normally be toxic to non-anomalous specimens, including lead-2 and 2,4 oxides, which is lead, oxygen, and then lead-3O4, benzene and sulfur dioxide, increased fertility, acceleration of currently understood evolutionary processes in response to environmental changes, with significant observable changes often occurring in one generation, and hostility towards humans and man-made structures. So what it would appear at first glance is that these are rapid evolutionary responses to man-made changes. And what we have is a table of observed anomalies in some selected species that back that up. We have a salmon that can facilitate the extraction of hydrogen ions from the water, creating free protons to fuel the synthesis of ATP via phosphorylation in the mitochondria throughout the body. And then we have a footnote here explaining what the fuck any of that means, or at least what you should take away from it. And it says, likely an adaptation to rapid acidification of their natural habitat. So that makes sense. The acidity in the water has risen, and it has these anomalous cells in the gills that will create the necessary stuff it needs to breathe and to generate energy. There's a black spruce tree that it has anomalous reactions in the chloroplasts, allowing the derivation of glucose from polyethylenes. So this is something I could see not being too far-fetched in the distant future. Trees that could somehow extract useful stuff from plastics. There is a sheep that has 3 separate digestive cavities in the gut, allowing the digestion of woody plants. And we have another footnote that says that alpine vegetation, the sheep's usual food source, has been almost wholly taken over by woody plants due to increasing temperatures. We have a particular flower whereby the seeds can attach to concrete surfaces. Upon germinating, the organism releases enzymes into the ground that dissolves concrete into its individual aggregates and then releases phosphorus to facilitate the growth of other plants in the vicinity. So none of these are like ridiculously far-fetched. I mean, dissolving concrete's pretty gnarly, but could it happen? I don't see why not. I'm not a chemistry major. We have a red-backed vole that primarily lives underground. The claws are developed for ideal burrowing. Individuals burrow en masse underneath man-made structures, often causing foundational instability and eventual collapse. But this process often traps the vole underground, resulting in its death. And lastly, an interior Alaskan wolf. The thinning of the nasal epithelium results in a significantly enhanced sense of smell. It possesses significant elongation of the frontal canines and engorged masticatory muscles that allow specimens to bite through extremely tough substances, including body armor, and has a lower aversive reactions to painful stimuli. That's bad news. I like calling out body armor to set the tone of what that might mean for us. So that is the table, and the dates of discovery on this go anywhere from 2040 to 2049. So we've seen these, really radical evolutionary changes to allow them to adapt to this environment. In a second addendum in September 4th, 2050, Foundation sites in South Africa detected the presence of anomalous native animals that were much like these 4851 instances. The next month, the same phenomenon was observed by sites stationed in India, and such animals were observed encroaching on civilian population centers. Loss of life in these areas totaled an estimated 150,000. Its threat level was upgraded to red. So it's interesting, we didn't use the threat level concept in the beginning, and we attach it later. Threat level I can take or leave. It doesn't really bother me as much as I think it bothers some people, and it is a way to sort of raise the stakes without going from Keter to super Keter. So I don't mind the little change there of threat level. We have a third addendum, and this is more or less the end of the work. This is on Christmas Day, 2050. At the behest of the GOC, members of the UN negotiated the Moscow Agreement as a means of developing a global plan of action to contain 4851. So this has the UN and the GOC's logos both on it, 2050 And then this does read like a UN declaration where each paragraph begins with a verb, and then, the parties in this agreement recognizing the international threat, taking into account recent developments and massive loss of life, taking into account the coalition's extrapolations predicting the number of animal instances alone will surpass the human population in 12 years. And the plant, fungal, and prokaryotic instances enjoy incalculably greater proliferation, recognizing the potentially catastrophic impacts and committed to preserving the safety of the human race, have agreed as follows. The agreement aims to strengthen the global response to the threat in the context of sustainable economic development and minimization of human suffering by 1. Pledging each party's economic and military assistance in the coalition's effort to exterminate these instances, 2. Establishing global surveillance channels that allow quick identification of areas where these anomalous folks are present, and therefore swift extermination before such organisms are allowed to proliferate. And lastly, authorizing global nuclear proliferation in preparation for deployment in areas with particularly high population densities of, in GOC speak, this is UTE 1015 species. As of 2051, April 22nd, 189 out of 193 members of the UN have ratified the Moscow Accords. End article. So this is interesting. It didn't go where I expected it to go. There's very obviously, a message being sent here about the impact of humanity on the environment and, the evolutionary pressure that places certain species under. In this universe, they've, picked up anomalous evolutionary abilities and the ability to sort of rapidly mutate. And you would think with this, these agreements that maybe would be, hey, let's do what we can to counteract this by changing our ways. No, that's not what we get. Let's mitigate this threat by killing them all. It's a very GOC, answer to the problem. I don't know why I really thought it was going to be anything else, but I did nonetheless. And because of that, I really like the piece. It's I like the work. I like the future setting. Not a whole heck of a lot I would change in this for the message it's trying to put out there. This was a very easy +1 for me. Moving on. SCP-4692, The Curious Case of Jackson W. Parnell by Andariel Halo. This is the first of hers that I've covered. First thing that I notice on this piece is that it is level 5 classified. Additionally, we have an object class of Euclid. That's a strange sort of combination of things, and it does make you kind of wonder what's going on. We have an image of a man in a hospital bed. This is presumably, well, there's no presumably about it. The caption tells us damn well. This is SCP-4692, Jackson W. Parnell. They're wearing a blue short sleeve shirt, maybe like your typical hospital gown. They've got cuff, blood pressure cuff on their left arm, and a IV on their left wrist, and the usual sort of stuff you might find in a hospital around it. Little digital readouts and little meters and IVs on bags and on bags on hooks, I should say, and all of the usual hospital accoutrements. The containment procedures are huge. They are fully 6 paragraphs long. To summarize them and get the important points across, it's at Site 1169. He's connected to a ventilator. There's an IV that is kept continually pushing a solution, 91%-2, with the remaining mix of saline and 5% glucose. Crews handling Parnell should be tested for the presence of -3. If we don't have enough of those people, volunteers are to be selected on the basis of country of origin, with preference given to those with no blood relatives who've lived in the U.S. within the past 75 years. And if we don't have enough of those, D-Class may be assigned. Personnel assigned to Parnell are offered Foundation-subsidized counseling services. Personnel are strongly advised to self-report to their supervisors any trauma sustained as a result of handling them. and are to be given priority consideration should they request transfer or leave. Amnestizing personnel requesting transfer is to be refused at this time. That's interesting. Containment breaches are mitigated by crews reestablishing power to the site and continuing delivery of Dash 2 via the IV solution. All site personnel and affected individuals must immediately proceed to the basement level 3 and engage the airlock to prevent the release of Dash 3. Following recontainment, surviving personnel are to be decontaminated and hospitalized on site. The deceased are to be incinerated as soon as surviving individuals are removed. The skip, our guy, remains semi-conscious and has been known to appeal to on-site personnel, pleading to be euthanized. Personnel who've been solicited in this way must report each occurrence to the site supervisor. So there's a lot going on. We've set the stakes pretty high, pretty quickly in the procedures. So this is another way to sort of approach the procedures where I talk about setting expectations. We tell a lot of story in the procedures as well, and that is an interesting way to go about it, and one that I don't see done well very often. I think they do a very good job here. And then I found this interesting. We have an addendum to the containment procedures. I almost never see this. I can't actually remember the last time I've seen addendum 1 between the procedures and the description, but here we have it. And it notes that due to climate change, the risk of extreme weather is increasing at this specific site, so our skip is scheduled to be relocated to a more stable site in terms of climate, and we list a couple of sites here, anywhere from Site 19, 34, 442, 1081, and 6119. I like that. 4692 is then described as an African-American male, Jackson W. Parnell, originally from Fayetteville, New York, and recovered in Fayetteville, North Carolina. His birth date's recorded as being in 1912, making him 107 as of the current time of reading, but his physical appearance suggests he's no older than 45 or 50, and he also requires the use of a medical ventilator and an IV solution, which we've already laid out the solution, and that is in order to stay alive. Dash 2 is described as blood plasma from an unidentified individual of Southern or Eastern European descent. This individual is believed to be responsible for Mr. Parnell's current state, as they were last seen exiting the apartment where Parnell was discovered. We have a composite sketch attached of white male, short hair. It's black and white, so it's hard to tell with the reflections whether what color their hair actually is. It's the trouble with these damn composite sketches. So until the suspect is located and interrogated, attempts to replicate the anomalous qualities of Dash 2 are to begin by December 1st, 2019. In the event that the ventilator or IV hooked up to Parnell fails, he'll begin to convulse and enter a state of shock, at which point a containment breach may occur within a period of 2 to 4 minutes. Any individual who's been in the presence of Mr. Parnell will begin to suffer symptoms similar to, but not consistent with, acute radiation sickness. So that's an odd sort of passage. They're similar to, but not consistent with. I would consider those two phrases to be, the same thing, but we explain that after 8 to 15 minutes, the individual will undergo severe cellular degeneration and hydrolysis, leading to severe dehydration and death. Decedents will begin to rapidly decompose. Muscle tissue will liquefy and bone marrow desiccates. So they begin basically rapidly aging, suffering cell death, and then just sort of rotting away. And after 40 to 55 minutes, direct blood relatives of the affected people will begin to suffer the same effects regardless of where they are. That is good and scary. I really like this inclusion, and it's a good payoff for why the stakes have been set so high. We then raise the stakes a little bit more. Additional individuals have also suffered these ill effects, including recipients of blood transfusions, as well as individuals with similar genetic structures who are not otherwise blood-related. The affected dead will release Dash 3, which is an aerosolized variant of Dash 2, which is highly contagious and flourishes under conditions of high humidity. So, one note here, we describe Dash 2 as blood plasma, and Dash 3 is then aerosolized blood plasma. But we say that it's contagious. Blood plasma itself, I don't get the connection with it being contagious. I get what it's trying to say, but the exact wording doesn't get it there. I think the meaning is fine, but none, you can take it for what it's supposed to mean, but it doesn't quite actually say that. So, in any event, resuscitating Parnell and reestablishing his IV solution will cease the effects of 4692 and halt the spread of the Dash 3. Individuals who have contracted Dash 3 remain permanently susceptible to it in the future, as well as their direct blood relatives. Physical damage or death sustained during a containment breach is unaffected by recontainment. That's an odd sort of sentence. I guess just to put out there that it's not like a temporal thing, like once they're recontained, the damage has fully been done. We go into a couple of addenda that are interesting and sort of explaining some intra-site politics. They were going to move the skip to site black box. That was halted due to complications with the on-site administration. The site director resigned in protest of the proposed relocations. They, on their part, refuted the allegations, but indicated that the site is in a region prone to flooding. It wouldn't be suitable for housing this particular anomaly. The next addendum says that a complaint was filed by site director Singh against site 18,104. We got a lot of goddamn sites. Because they allegedly dismantled equipment that would be used to maintain this skip. The director alleges that this was done in response to an official request to transfer this skip, and the on-site director claims it was due for dismantling for over 6 months prior to that request. So some intra-foundation politics. It is an interesting sort of bit of nuance to the work. Does it advance the story at hand directly? No, but it does put out an interesting sort of thing that the Foundation, at least the people that make up it in a few places, are scared of this thing. And it is something that doesn't get shown all that often. So we go from those addenda to a discovery log. He was discovered in an apartment complex in 2019. Surviving witness testimony indicates he was calling out for help and managed to attract the attention of a resident who subsequently broke into the apartment. It's believed that Parnell, due to his condition, persuaded the resident to terminate his life support system in order to euthanize him. And the resident subsequently began to deteriorate and lost consciousness. Police reports taken in, we have redacted, Florida, Wisconsin, and redacted parts of North Carolina indicate that family members of the resident began to suffer similar symptoms accompanied by rapid necrosis and death. So this was across the entire U.S., basically from Florida to Wisconsin. These occurrences were largely simultaneous, and several officers began to report identical symptoms soon afterwards. And then we have 2 black boxes worth of officers and 3 black boxes worth of additional individuals being hospitalized during this outbreak. Public health emergency declaration was made in all the affected regions. The FBI got involved. Some 3 black boxes worth of individuals perished during this event. The man Parnell was resuscitated by a neighbor who discovered Parnell and reattached their IV solution and powered their ventilator. Parnell appeared pale and cold to the touch, but continued to display signs of life and fully recovered once the IV and ventilator were reestablished. The neighbor died 4 days later due to injuries sustained during the outbreak. And a sample of his statement is attached, and we have 2 collapsibles. The first one reads Witness Statement, Black Box 2019, and the second is 911 transcript. So this has, the first one involves an officer and our individual, and we note at the very top, individual is unlikely to recover from injuries sustained from the incident on Black 2019. I don't necessarily know that we could infer that this early on in our discovery of it, if they're able to to talk. We don't really get a good indication of how they might appear to the officer to make that assessment. Our witness claims that he heard Parnell yelling, "Help, I've been kidnapped," and yelled out again, "Help, I'm trapped in this guy's apartment." And the guy then calls our witness by his name, which he doesn't know this guy, so that's interesting. Tries to get somebody to help him. The witness tries to kick in the door. Doesn't manage, but the doorknob falls off, so he removes the chain and the lock, and apparently this thing had a few locks on the door. Goes into the apartment, and straight ahead was a dude on a hospital bed, had an oxygen mask on, a needle in his arm, pumping something yellow into him. That he didn't look sick, but he was barely moving, strapped down to the bed like he was being tortured. He got a hand out and was able to bang on the wall and pull up his mask so he could call for help. His voice was weak, and he couldn't breathe without the mask, the ventilator. So he said he was probably calling for help for days, and no one heard him. Parnell asks this witness to untie him and pull the needle out. He obliges, and Parnell starts crying, thanking him, saying he wanted to die, but the other guy wouldn't let him. And the officer asked, "When did the pain start?" And the witness says, "I think like right away I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't until I got the needle out of the guy, I started untying him, I felt like my insides were starting to get hot. I turned my head away to cough, like into my elbow. Then I was coughing nonstop, and like each cough, my head would hurt. I started stumbling back. I couldn't stop coughing. Then I started feeling like I had to throw up. Put my head back, threw up a little, and had to swallow it down. My sides start hurting, like real bad, in your ribs. Said it felt like something exploded in there and cracked my ribs. Kept gagging and choking, threw up again. Tried to swallow it down again, but ended up slipping and busting his ass. Tried to hold it in and started shooting out of his nose. That's a nice little gross imagery. So then he just let loose and vomited all over the floor, and says everything hurt. My stomach, my ribs, my throat, my nose, all of it hurt. And no blood, not at first. I got back up to try and help the guy. He was out. He was shaking, he was rocking like he was about to die. Witness kept vomiting, so he just left the room, had no idea what was happening. Maybe the guy was poisoned or giving off some kind of chemical. Officer asked, "Do you see anything in the air? Do you smell anything?" And the witness says, "Didn't see anything. Nothing smelled except the dude. He smelled like a homeless guy. Not that bad that he'd be throwing up. The needle, I don't know. I didn't touch it. I just pulled on the tube to get it out. After a while, I started getting really sweaty. It was getting in my eyes. I couldn't wipe it away because I had puke all over my hands." And the officer asked, "How did you alert the others?" And the witness said, What others?" And the officer says, "Your friends outside. They started screaming and called the police." Witness says, "I didn't call out to them. I got out into the hall and my legs went. I didn't hear them, but it felt like they just broke into pieces." He said his legs gave out. I didn't hear the legs snap, but they felt like they just broke into pieces. I hit my head on the wall and went out like a light. I didn't talk to anybody else. So that's more or less where we end it. So the guy is probably in a very rough state, and that does explain how we say he's unlikely to recover. He might be in a really bad way by the time he's giving this interview. So we have the 911 call. This is between a dispatcher and a couple of people end up being involved in the call. A female tells the dispatcher, "We need help. We're at Redacted. We need ambulances now. People are sick and throwing up. We're standing outside the Redacted when my brother started throwing up. He collapsed. All his friends started throwing up. We've been poisoned or something. Someone's poisoned us. We're dying. How many there are with you?" asked the dispatcher, and she replies, 6. Vomiting is heard in a loud clatter. There's scraping and clattering. And then a man picks up the phone, and the dispatcher asks, "Sir, is the person I was speaking to still there?" And the male says, "She's sick. She's bleeding. Everyone here is bleeding." And dispatcher says, "Okay, did you see anything? Was someone there who attacked you?" And the male says, "No, she's bleeding. Nobody did anything. We're all just chilling, and suddenly we're all throwing up and bleeding and dying." And the dispatcher says, "Okay, sir, I have medical help on the way. Just stay on the line with me and tell me exactly what happened." And he says, "Nothing happened. We just got sick. We didn't." And then there's a loud scream heard in the background, followed by wind and another loud clatter. Dispatcher says, "Sir, what's happening now, sir?" And the call hangs up. And we go from that to our final addendum. Proposals are being drawn up, and discussions between the associated site directors is scheduled to take place at Site 19 on April 20th, that struck through, June 9th, that struck through, April 20th of the next year, that struck through, April 20th of the year after, that struck through, June 9th of that year, that struck through. Further discussion on the relocation of 4692 have been postponed indefinitely. End article. This thing covers a lot of ground in what is a relatively shorter work for everything that it does. We are telling, 2 or 3 different stories in this, with the intra-site drama, the story between the man and this unknown person that in some way put Parnell in this condition, and then the effects that Parnell has on the others around him. There's a lot going on, and I think there's more to it than I'm necessarily getting on a first reading. It's hard to tell exactly what the let's call it the anomalous bargain was between this man possessing the -2 and Jackson Parnell. It's not really elaborated on in it, at least anywhere that I can immediately pick up, but it's not so obscure that you ignore it. Like, there is a connection here, and it is perhaps intentionally not fully elaborated on. There's a lot of mystery left in the piece. I think that's fine. I think, the fact that it's not fully resolved is explained away by the Foundation kind of intentionally pushing this thing off. Like, they don't want to deal with it because of the ramifications of having to be the site involved in keeping this thing maintained. Now, I would maybe like to see, since we're talking about all these different sites and the site drama, it would almost be good to see some something from this site 1169 that is actually containing this entity currently, something from their perspective to evoke some pathos, something to make you feel for the team that is doing what they can to keep this horrific thing in check, while the rest of the Foundation collectively intentionally ignores them and how serious it is. I think that might be, it would have been a nice addition to this piece all in all. But that aside, I think it's still a really good story and a very easy +1. Now, last but not least, SCP-4497, titled Whose Cuisine Reigns Supreme by Mini-Meats. Mini-Meats, by the way, has another episode up of Crit Lives Within, looking at SCP-4871 Mirror Image by Prosec. That is available at critlives.podbean.com. This one has an object class of Keter and no images in the article at all. This article, when fully uncollapsibled, is nearly into Longboy territory, so this is going to be a higher level overview of it. There's a lot of dialogue that is really, really good, and I do encourage giving this a full reading, because we're just going to cover the high points on this recap. The procedures are interesting in how they begin. It says, due to SCP-4497's metaphysical nature, it is contained within an individual designated as -1. We have a metaphysical Keter skip, and we established that in the first sentence. That is something to look forward to. They are housed at Site 19 in the event that -1 loses the mantle of 4497 and demonstrates no further anomalous traits. They are to be debriefed and returned to the general populace. We have the Sanderson-Crosby Interpretive Dreaming Matrix Mark IV, codename Skid Mark IV. This is a dream interface to broadcast and record interactions relevant to this metaphysical skip. We use MTF Omicron Rho, the Dream Team. They are authorized to facilitate the reacquisition of 4497 should the current instance of -1 lose the mantle to an uncontained challenger. So we have some sort of contest or a challenger and champion sort of thing, and an MTF that is in charge of regaining the title, regaining the SCP to be contained by us. There's an update here in a pull quote that sort of promises some exposition. It says, upon initialization of the article, the script was classified as safe. Per the events of, we have a strike through that says log 2, and then it says log 3. The object classification has been amended to Euclid, that struck through, and then it says Keter. So log 2 got it bumped to Euclid, log 3 got it bumped to Keter. So we are also promising early on some escalating action. So 4497 is described as a metaphysical mantle which imparts supernatural knowledge and skill within the domain of culinary arts. Those affected by the skip are intimately aware of the breadth of their ability and skill and demonstrate highly competitive tendencies in an effort to exercise the nature of -1. This culinary omniscience extends to any material which is even theoretically edible and capable of being processed through the use of culinary utensils. Through anomalous means, the use of 4497 permanently alters these processed materials into a non-toxic and human edible state. It's a lot to try and put together, that they become a superhuman chef and can apparently, prep and cook anything, even if it's only theoretically edible. This ability appears to only manifest in dreams. It's a shared dreamscape that bears a resemblance to a sports arena or stadium with a kitchen in the center of it, a variety of utensils and equipment common to cooking and baking. They are pitted against a challenger for the right to wear the mantle of 4497. The challenger is designated as -2 and has to date always been a unique individual during each recorded observation. Some have later been identified as members of the public. The majority of them have been cataloged as members of GOI 31, the Oneroi Collective. That's interesting, and that does fit in with their MO of being involved heavily in dreams. The challenge, pitting -1 against -2, proceeds in a predictable, ritualistic fashion. Long story short, it's a cooking show. It's like Iron Chef or any one of those sorts of things. The winner, should the reigning champion be defeated, the mantle will immediately be transferred. The previous champion will be immediately and permanently ejected from the dreamscape, and this ejection appears to permanently damage their ability to achieve REM sleep, and all attempts at restoring this ability have so far been unsuccessful. So we have some stakes to go with it, as to if you lose this Iron Chef cook-off. We have a discovery log, December 12th, 2019, so this is most certainly near future. This is a containment specialist. His name is Dr. Manny Eats. We have Dr. Eats involved in this skip. That's right, folks. He encountered a known member of the Oneroi Collective during an attempt at lucid dreaming. They were non-hostile and self-identified as the Lord Mayor of Flavortown. Now, this was the point in the work where I minimized it, and I pulled up the chat, and I said, I quoted that, the Lord Mayor of Flavortown. I said, "Are you fucking serious, Mini Meats?" And he replied, "Deadly serious." The Lord Mayor and contact with them led to Dr. Eats receiving an invitation to Kitchen Stadium, believed to be the origin point of 4497. He was invited to participate in the challenge and proceeded without prior approval. The specialist notes his predecessor and the holder of the mantle -1 was an ambulatory 2-meter tall mason jar occupied by a single gherkin-style pickle suspended in an unknown fluid which identified itself as the flavor elevator. So, 6-foot-tall sentient pickle jar. Got it. The good Dr. Eats defeated the champion in a battle themed around yellow cake uranium. The doctor was not allowed to taste, see, or perceive the champion's dish, but reports that he created a yellow cake curry featuring potatoes with actual eyes, because potatoes have eyes on them. They're the little bumps, little things on potatoes. They're called eyes. These have actual eyes, as well as the thigh meat of megafauna of unknown origin and type, but superficially resembling a Rhode Island red chicken. He won the contest, became -1, and Dr. Eats reported that he awoke to discover the following feedback was flagged as having mentioned him on the Oneroi-hosted yowl.slp review site. And this is another collapsible with yowl.slp, presumably sleep, reviews. And we have Judge 1, 2, and 3. 1 really liked it. This curry like a cancer grows. It will be the death of me, but I can only hope my ancestors find me worthy. I go to face them with my belly full, heart happy, and DNA thoroughly denatured. Judge 2 says, I could almost count the eyes on the potatoes as I devoured your curry. I enjoyed this immensely, but I am French. 4 out of 5. That's a fucking blast from the past reference. I don't think half our readership was alive to catch that reference. So Judge 3 basically calls Judge 2 a bitch and says, here, take my 7 stars out of 5. My arbitrary and hidden criteria are superior to hers. So there's a ton of little references and little things in this piece that I really enjoy. So we go from this to an incident log. Our current -1 had provided an apple dessert for consumption. Researcher said that his version of the dessert was superior to the one produced by our champion, by Dr. Eats. And Dr. Eats challenged this researcher to produce his dessert, and we'll hold a contest by popular vote. So we did it, and by a final count of 23 to 17, the researcher won. Their dessert was better, and the mantle unexpectedly transferred to the new victor via competition in real space. And due to this, 4497 was upgraded to Euclid. So we have another incident log. And this is the third one that we already know this upgraded it to Keter. During a scheduled update regarding ongoing and unrelated matters, a UIU field agent attended lunch in the Site 19 cafeteria. Our current champion had prepared potatoes au gratin to accompany the main course. Site director Sanderson questioned the UIU agent as to whether or not he enjoyed the food. He offered the following remarks, which were recorded. And he says, reminds me of my Nana's recipe. Not quite as good, of course, but pretty damn close. And that night, -1 was no longer able to enter REM sleep. Apparently, the defending champion was represented by a retroform spectral entity identifying itself as Nana Paluzzi. As the object appears to now respond to declarative subjective comparison, 4497 has been upgraded to Keter. So this one guy passes judgment on these potatoes au gratin and says, it wasn't as good as my grandma's, and grandma suddenly becomes the reigning champion. So it would be even more comical if it wasn't like the stakes are like you can no longer achieve REM sleep. Like, that's pretty gnarly. So we go to field log 4. God, I love the name of this. This is Operation Snackdown. This is the remainder of the work is in this. It is all dialogue from the point of view of Omicron Rho, the Dream Team, being interfaced into this Dream Seer Thrower interface in an attempt to reacquire the mantle of champion via competition. And this our MTF captain, Boris Sokolov, enters himself as the challenger. All of the MTF is involved, and they're all equipped with subdermal thalamic sigils, which allow for cooperation at near instantaneous subconscious speeds between all attuned individuals. So our MTF is collectively the challenger. The captain is the primary challenger. The rest of the team are his sous chefs. -1 Nana Paluzzi manifested in order to defend the mantle of 4497. And the rest of this is the show. We don't immediately have a name for it, which, it's interesting. I was really looking forward, like what do we call this? What do we call it? We don't actually. I don't think it's ever really named. In any event, we're brought up to speed by the host that last week, Nana Paluzzi defended her title against the ravenous bug beast of Zeta Reticuli 3A in Battle Chartreuse. Why? We don't know. Does it matter? Probably not. So we have a little bit of some production values that are setting the stage for what this week's special theme will be, and it is the Spanish Inquisition. And the audio is filled with gasps, ooh and ah noises, applause, and general cheering from the off-screen crowd. The host lays out the rules. The Council of Judges are to be presented with your most sumptuous interpretation of this choice ingredient, the Spanish Inquisition. 1 appetizer, 1 main course, and 1 dessert. You have 3.6 e to positive 15 picoseconds to prepare. So, and it says your 3.60 plus 15 picoseconds of battle Spanish Inquisition begins now, and we I can. The thing I love about this piece is that um, I I worked once upon a time as a waiter at a Mexican place in Kentucky. If you're ever considering being a waiter at a Mexican restaurant in Kentucky, fucking skip it. It's a terrible job. But there was a lot of downtime, surprisingly, and on the TV, sort of off to a room that was always empty because it was fucking dead. 99 days out of 100, we always had the Food Network on, and there was always one of these shows going on, Iron Chef America, or something like this. So this is a near and dear thing to me from honestly a fairly crappy time in my life. These were always a little entertaining. I didn't really give a shit about cooking, but I could enjoy the drama nonetheless. Our contestants heap portions of secret ingredient into large baskets. They transfer whole corpses onto gurneys. And as this plays out, the audio fades and voiceover begins in an apparent advertisement, as I alluded to at the beginning of the show, distant memory of a forlorn star brand farms and their associates. So the thing with the MTF side of this is that they are able to communicate and act in near instantaneously due to these sigils that they have implanted to do exactly that. With only 6E plus 13 picoseconds remaining, we should be plating by now, and the deadline draws nearer. A klaxon declares the cooking time is finally ended, and the previously bright white light is replaced by ominous deep red light. The contestants bring their dishes to set before the council of judges. The challenger goes first, and Agent Sokolov prepares to reveal his three-course meal. First, the appetizer, which is a callback to the greatest heretics of southern France, with our take on a sort of a charcuterie board. We have thinly sliced, nice and fatty inquisitor belly, brined in a Dead Sea marinade, then just real quickly been raked over the conceptual essence of a torturer's rack. Served with thin, crispy, compressed slices of Cardinal Richelieu's beard. The cheese is a sharp cheddar from the Mare Frigoris region of Luna, and the wine isn't wine at all. It's distilled heresy, which, turns out, has the same properties and flavor of Pinot Noir. And judges eat it. The first judge appears to be a direct representation of Alexander Hamilton, except he's a 2-meter tall Komodo dragon. What does that look like? No fucking idea. Ask Mini Meats. The second judge is the 1-meter wide disembodied head of Salvador Dali, with his mustache twisted into a Mobius strip. And the third judge is a completely hairless Guy Fieri adorned with sunglasses. The main course is Inquisitor's thighs wrapped in liturgical vestments, soaked in sherry, finished off with a rub of ground Espelette peppers, cumin, saffron, and ground teeth, and seared over the same open fires we used to roast the feet of the heretics for our side dish. Speaking of, we have some cracklins made from the heretics' feet, and we left those out to confess to their heresy for almost the entire hour and really let them render down and crisp up. Enjoy. Now, this does say the entire hour, and I don't know my math when we talk about picoseconds out to the 15th power. Maybe that's an hour. I kind of doubt it. I suspect it's something much, much, much smaller. So I don't know if that's an omission or just the convention of how these shows usually work. So, cracklins made from heretics' feet. If you're not familiar with cracklins, or as we call them in New Mexico, chicharrones, they are, well, typically you see them as pork rinds. They're skins. And so we've got skins of heretics' feet as the main course, along with the Inquisitor's thighs. And for dessert, we have plenary indulgence, a French-style upside-down apple dessert infused with a rich and decadent papal authority, served warm with a caramel-flavored Reformation sauce and a dollop of vanilla custard ice cream. We took a real risk here. It's just plain old, totally normal vanilla custard. So the three judges are, really, really in favor. And Dali says, "You didn't ask me to imagine a single thing for you on this entire menu. I'm not sure that's worked out in your favor here, but we'll see. Overall strong, just not a lot of risks being taken here." And then the hairless Guy Fieri, lordy, I couldn't do this justice if I tried. I'm going to leave that as an exercise for the reader of how over the top Guy Fieri could possibly be. We're about there. I'm going to leave that out. You need to read this, $44.97. we go to the reigning champion, Nana Paloozi, who explains that this was fairly difficult as a woman who's been dead for nearly 10 years. She has provided an appetizer of cold mushroom salad tossed with vinaigrette. The mushrooms grown from fields fertilized with a mixture of the bone meal and ash of heretics, and then pressed between copies of the Malleus Maleficarum until nice and thin. The marinade and dressing are a mixture of olive oil, shallots, garlic, the reticence of the clergy, and a dash of increasingly brutal prosecution for that extra kick. The main course is porco dio, cured and slow-cooked long pig, tossed in a gravy of inquisitor fat, disregarded facts, and thinly veiled political agendas extracted from Renaissance-era royal courts, paired with a tangy mango slaw and a nice potato roll to make your own sandwich. So, pulled pork from long pig. I like it. And then, finally, for dessert. Fortunately, since I'm just one woman, I wasn't quite able to get everything on the plate that I'd hoped before time ran out. These picoseconds really flew by. This is my grandson's favorite dish. Potatoes au gratin. Enjoy. Potatoes au gratin for dessert. So, Alexander Hamilton asks, I'm having a hard time tasting the Inquisitor in this, Nana. Where is it? And she says, that was the thing I had trouble getting on the plate. Sorry. Guy Fieri asks, so the one thing that needed to be here, you didn't even attempt to work into the dish that you served us? Says, that's correct. Dali says, I love it. So subversive. So we're thanked, votes are tallied, and we have dramatic music, and then we actually acknowledge her as Iron Chef Nana Paloozi. Challenger Boris Sokolov. The votes are in. The winner of Battle Spanish Inquisition is the Challenger Boris Sokolov. Our MTF has won. The agent blushes. His sous chefs rush in to congratulate him. He crosses the aisle and attempts to shake Nana Paloozi's hand, but she disperses into ectoplasm as her final pain scream momentarily eclipses the cheering and applause. That's horrible. Credits roll. A black chef's jacket embroidered with Sokolov's name is handed to him. The screen fades to black. End recording. End article. So, just for being an absurd sort of diversion, I really, really enjoyed this piece. There's a ton of little details. I can tell just a ton of effort was put into this, and it really does shine for the extra time and effort. This is true to a format I do know fairly well and enjoy. I like when things sort of cross over in my various universes, and that's what we've got here. It's really well done, and it has a little bit of everything in terms of some stakes, some horror, a little understated, but at the end, for the screaming spectral entity being louder than a stadium full of people, is a nice touch. It's the only real punch of its kind in the piece. And humor throughout that's really well done, and for the most part understated, except when it intentionally goes way over the top. Really like the piece. This was a very easy +1 as well. And that's it. That's week 26. Mailbag. AIS Mallard asks, given the impracticality of death row only and monthly terminations, how do you imagine D-Class are recruited and managed within the Foundation? Are there aspects of their existence you think should be different? Now, this is something that I've soapboxed on at length on Reddit, actually, that I really, really dislike the insinuation that a lot of people hold on to, that D-Class are death row inmates. It doesn't make sense for a number of reasons. The big one being that death row inmates are watched like hawks by any number of advocacy and watchdog groups. So it doesn't make any sense from that front. You cannot make a death row inmate disappear in the civilized world. We have laid out and generally agreed on some things that would give the Foundation access to a ready supply of warm bodies. It's SCP-2000. Its ability to create people, there are some larger things that 2000 can do, but I like it as an ability to farm people. We have no lack of skips that could be put together to clone people and make perfect little soldiers of the Foundation. That's actually something I want to explore, and I've had in my head a tale that I want to do where one employee asks another employee, what does it mean to be family? And to sort of pitch it as, sort of a conversation between two employees that have maybe been away from home for too long. But as it goes on, it becomes more and more apparent that neither of them know what a family is because they have been grown by the foundation to perform their jobs. And that, in fact, nobody on the foundation at this point, with the exception of perhaps a few people on the '05 council, ever existed outside of the foundation's control. They were born, raised, employed, and will die at the foundation. And if, in my head, the D class are a shoo-in for something like that because they, we need a lot of them. And that is a really interesting ethical question to address as well. These cloned people that would still have, a consciousness, would still feel pain, would still, do all that sort of stuff. But, are being sacrificed, mowed down, whatever, to assist in containment. I think there's a lot of really fertile ethical ground to look at when you look at the foundation potentially growing their own, if you will, when it comes to D class and more than just D class. With that, I'm going to bid you farewell. I apologize if the audio quality on this one wasn't up to my usual standards, and maybe I'm being a little too too demanding, but it's really goddamn hot here. I've had the air conditioner on, which I almost never do. I usually just leave it off and suffer, but it was 103 today, so it was staying on. Week 27 should be on Friday. I'm not positive. It may go a day early, it may go a day late due to the holidays and the fact that I will be off on Friday. So we'll see. Right now the plan is to do it Friday. In between now and then, there should be at least one show, maybe a second. I will be doing a postmortem on 4406 and my UIU format this week. That will go out to patrons immediately and available the following week on scp.cafe and the usual channels. So I will see you in a few days. And if you thought this show was worth $1, really do appreciate anything you might spare over at patreon.com/scpcafe. So see you in a few days. Keep reading, keep writing, and I'll see you then.